The story of Fire Emblem 7 gets a lot of flack, and honestly, most of it is deserved. It definitely could have used a second draft and a more competent translation, but I think some quality writing still shines through. One of the strongest themes in FE7 is how one generation is affected by the last. That theme runs through many of the most important characters in this story. Lyn grappling with her dual heritage, Hector coping with the loss of all authority figures, and Eliwood chasing his father's shadow. The game even uses this theme to explain how the main antagonist of FE6 became a villain to begin with. Even a lot of the supporting cast are shown to be heavily influenced by their relationships with their parents. In the margins though, a more atypical approach to this theme can be found with Nurgle's creations, the morphs. There are 5 named morphs in FE7, Ephidel, Sonia, Denning, Limstella, and Kishna. They aren't Nurgle's literal children, but he is their creator all the same. Through the morphs, we see the consequences of a maker who treats progeny like instruments. This video will explore how those 5 figures complicate and reinforce the game's themes about legacy, parenthood, and moral responsibility. And of course, if you would like, comment, and subscribe, that would be awesome. Every little bit helps the channel and I really appreciate it. Before diving into the morphs themselves, it helps to go over how they came to be. Nurgle is a sorcerer whose backstory ties directly into FE7's themes of ancestry and legacy. Through his relationships with several plot-important characters, he represents a particular model of parenthood and of creation that the game interrogates. Rather than nourishing those he brings into being, he weaponizes them. The morphs are the most literal manifestation of that. They are created with a purpose, given form and function, and then discarded when they cease to be useful. Understanding Nurgle's relationship with the morphs reframes their thematic intent. Where other parent and child relationships in FE7 are often messy, Nurgle's relation to the morphs is quite simple. He makes them as instruments of his will. This is crucial because it lets the game make a comparison between what are essentially different styles of parenting. By showing a parent who treats life as something to manufacture and control, the game sharpens its contrast with the more humane, complicated, and ultimately redemptive relationships elsewhere in FE7. Before we even meet the individual morphs, understanding this warped source of their existence makes clear why they each reflect some facet of what happens when creation is divorced from care. Ephidel is the first morph you meet and serves as a primer for what these characters are like and how they're treated. He's sent into Lycia by Nurgle with the intent of sowing rebellion against Ostia. I assume that we're meant to view Ephidel as a competent and cunning villain. Whether this is actually the case is another matter. To his credit, he does successfully get Darren to betray them and also gets Helman to do the same, at least for a while. The idea that Ephidel is some mastermind is undermined by him failing to finish off either Helman or Housen before they can meet the main lords, ordering Jafar to leave instead of just killing Eliwood, and the general ambiguity around what his plans actually are, but this isn't a hit piece on FE7's story. Anyway, Ephidel dies when there's an explosion at the Dragon's Gate and Nurgle abandons him. I could talk about how stupid it is that the morphs are shown to have the ability to teleport and Ephidel seemingly forgets that here, but that's not the point. The point is that despite Ephidel succeeding, he is discarded anyways. The contrast between his functional success and his ultimate abandonment highlights Nurgle's view of the morphs as instruments rather than beings. As well, Ephidel's death quote is interesting to me. It suggests that the morphs might not be as unfeeling as the narrative states. If they were purely puppets, a death quote expressing so much emotion would be performative. However, he's not performing emotions for anyone at this moment. Within the script's economy, I think this moment kinda plants a seed of doubt. Taken together, Ephidel's presence establishes the baseline for how the story wants us to understand morphs. He's competent, allegedly, yet expendable. Emotionless by design, yet oddly expressive at times. Through him, the game raises its first questions about what the morphs truly are, questions that only grow more complicated as the story progresses. Ephidel, thankfully, didn't linger long in the plot, but the contradictions embedded in his character set the stage for the deeper thematic explorations that follow. Sonia is the most prevalent morph in the main story of FE7. While she is not the strongest, she is one of the most advanced, evidenced by her convincing herself that she's human. And yet, even in her delusions, she still lacks agency as she's only so adept at mimicking emotion because Nurgle made her for the purpose of manipulating Brendan Reed. Her relationship to the other morphs is also interesting. We see her refer to Limstella as a puppet and become irate when Limstella even spoke to her, and much more so when it's suggested that she be relieved of her duties. She also makes it a point that she wants the credit for killing Brendan Reed, further showing how prideful she is. None of the other morphs care this much, or really at all, about their image. Interestingly, Sonia exists on both sides of FE7's themes of parentage. She is at once being used by her creator, Nurgle, while also using her own daughter, Nino. Side note, I know that Nino isn't really her daughter, but I don't think that distinction matters much. If I can consider Nurgle to be the symbolic father of the morphs, I can consider Sonia to be Nino's mother. Sonia was going to kill her, but was stopped by Nurgle, who ordered her to raise Nino and try to make use of her magic power. Unlike Sonia and the morphs, Nino doesn't just fall in line with what her creator wants of her. She strikes out on her own and is eventually rewarded for it. We can see this reinforced in other places as well, mainly with Jafar, who is in a similar position as Nino, being adopted by Nurgle and raised into a weapon. As a result, these characters survived and went on to help the player win. I think this could also be contrasted with Lloyd and Linus, who took issue with the direction of the Black Fang but couldn't bring themselves to turn their backs on it. As such, they end up dying for an organization that didn't care for them. Sonia ultimately embodies the most insidious possibilities of Nurgle's creations. a being so thoroughly engineered for deception that she deceives even herself. Her cruelty towards other morphs, her warped maternal role towards Nino, and her own delusions of humanity all serve to highlight how hollow Nurgle's gifts truly are. The morph with the least screen time is Denning. Denning was created for a single purpose, to invite Eliwood to the Dread Isle. This is the most extreme example of Nurgle treating the morphs as naught but tools. Denning has no personality, he doesn't need one to accomplish what Nurgle created him for. Limstella is repeatedly stated to be the strongest of the morphs. She's ruthless and loyal, killing several of the four fangs without second thought for failing to stop Eliwood. She can always be seen around Nurgle at his beck and call. Her interactions with others characterize her as extremely terse and professional. She is only ever interested in doing Nurgle's bidding and doesn't waste any time on anything else. Of the morphs, I find her to be the most interesting because of how she challenges what we know about them. The reason I say this is because of her death quote, "I am not human. This body and this heart are constructs. Yes, as is this sorrow." This is the most evocative line in the game and is honestly the main reason I made this video. The first two sentences display an amount of self-awareness that no prior morph had, and I think this can be connected to her being a more advanced morph than Sonia. Sonia was able to convincingly mimic human emotions. Limstella has gone beyond that. She's smart enough to know what she actually is. And it's then in that last sentence where the standards of morphs are challenged. Limstella knows she's a construct. She knows she is not meant to feel emotions. Of the morphs, Limstella, and Denning I guess, is the morph least likely to delude herself into thinking she can feel. And despite that, she still feels sorrow and death. To me, this shows that maybe the morphs really do feel emotion beyond mimicking what they think emotion is. With a single line, Ephidel both adds depth to Limstella's character and recontextualizes everything we knew about the morphs. For as much grief as you could give this game's script, I do think that this line is genuinely excellent. I want to talk about this line more because it's cool. Limstella's admission that she's constructed places her at a different ontological status from the other morphs. Sonia thinks she's human, while Limstella knows she's not. That difference signals a deeper cognitive architecture. This knowledge doesn't grant her freedom, but it's a kind of clarity that makes her feeling all the more tragic. She understands the terms of her existence and yet still experiences sorrow. As well, Limstella's death destabilizes the player's assumptions. Up to that point, the morphs could be read as interesting but ultimately inhuman tools. Limstella forces the player to reckon with the possibility that Nurgle's creations are morally significant individuals rather than just his chess pieces. This also affects past scenes involving the character. When she kills the Reeds or Ursula, she remarks on what brilliant quintessence they have. She clearly values the power that they will offer to Nurgle. It's a show of emotion that wouldn't make sense if she were truly a lifeless puppet. There's also what I think is one of the best scenes in the game, where she finishes off Sonia. As I already went over, Sonia was talking down to Limstella and calling her a puppet. Later, after Sonia's defeat, Limstella calls her a puppet and says she has no quintessence to harvest. I think this can be read as Limstella rubbing it in. She knows Sonia very well, and she knows that being called a puppet by a morph would be especially degrading. I get the impression that Limstella finds Sonia to be deeply irritating, and this is her way of reveling in Sonia's downfall. Another big part of what I like so much about Limstella is how the game doesn't really make a big deal out of any of this. FE7 has a bad habit of telling you how to feel and what to think about certain characters, but in this case, the suggestion that Limstella feels emotion at a deeper level is only briefly hinted at and left up to interpretation. Limstella's character offers a re-evaluation of what it means to be a morph. Her unwavering loyalty, her clear-eyed understanding of her own artificial nature, and her final acknowledgement of sorrow all point to a being far more complex than the emotionless constructs Nurgle has made. Through her, the narrative reveals cracks in the premise that morphs are mere tools, suggesting instead that they possess an inner life hidden beneath what their creator made them for. I think Limstella's final moments elevate her to a genuinely tragic figure. Kishna appears multiple times throughout FE7 and is the most mysterious morph. He never speaks, doesn't actually fight you, and has powers that no other morph is shown to have. Another thing of note is his design. Most of the morphs look quite young, but Kishna is clearly way older. We also can't see the black hair or golden eyes that are a visual trademark of the morphs. This could be hinting at him being Nurgle's first morph, but it could also be hinting towards his botched creation. Kishna is essentially Nurgle's bastard child. Nurgle wanted to create a morph with emotion, but it went horribly wrong and the result was a morph that sealed his creator's magic. Nurgle thusly rejected Kishna, and his desire to keep him hidden is actually reflected in gameplay. Kishna can only be encountered in missable guidance chapters. I really like this implementation. I think it kind of leaves the impression that you saw something that you absolutely were not meant to know about. I don't really understand why he's just kind of wandering around random parts of a league and happens to end up in the player's path, but I guess that adds to his mystery. Making Kishna accessible only through optional content is kind of smart from a storytelling perspective. It both rewards players who seek out everything there is to do in the game and simulates Nurgle trying to hide his own shame. In his final chapter, Nils remarks that the energy from Kishna had been hostile in their previous encounters but was much more somber now. After he's defeated, he crumbles to dust as the other morphs had and screams out for Nurgle. Despite having been totally rejected by Nurgle, Kishna still called out to him in his final moments. I think Kishna does a good job of exposing the emotional fallout of Nurgle's hubris. He was built for one purpose but was condemned to a life of suffering when he failed to fulfill it. While the morphs do not have parents in the usual sense, Nurgle did still create them. We've seen through them what Nurgle would consider to be a perfect child. This idea is contrasted by Nurgle's other children, Ninian and Nils. These two, while not artificial like the morphs, do still have an atypical origin. Being the child of both a dragon and a human puts him at the center of the tension between both groups. Ninian and Nils are neither 100% dragon nor 100% human, in a similar way that the morphs are neither 100% construct or 100% human. What makes them different is their actions in the main story. Because these two betray Nurgle and claim independence, they're granted humanity by the narrative while the morphs aren't. They achieve personhood by rejecting their creator and going down their own paths. The morphs, who either cannot or do not reject Nurgle in the same way, have their humanity trapped in an ambiguous status. One last note, the morphs all have 0 luck. At first I thought this was maybe meant to avoid frustration through low percent crits, but that doesn't really make sense since the human enemies still have luck. I think this may be meant to convey that they're unlucky to have even been brought into existence, but I'm not too sure on that. Maybe the lack of a stat that's connected to spontaneity reinforces that they only exist along a set path? I don't know, but if it's intentional, it is a cool way to have the gameplay reflect the themes of the characters. The morphs become far more compelling once you stop reading them as evil minions and start reading them as an indictment of Nurgle's ethics as a creator. They're what happens when a parent chooses function over care. FE7 places Nurgle's model of parenthood alongside countless others, and the contrast exposes just how hollow his legacy really is. FE7 is a story about inheritance, and the morphs complicate that theme by embodying a hostile kind of legacy, not one of love or memory, but of intention. They are the results of a worldview that treats the next generation as tools. And yet, even within that rigid design, fractures appear. Kishna and Ephidel fail to accomplish the purposes they were built for, Limstella experiences sorrow she was never meant to feel, Sonia's warped maternal role reveals that imitation can accidentally produce something real. These moments show that inheritance in FE7 isn't deterministic, even a legacy built on violence can be contested, bent, or broken. In the end, I think the morphs bring a strange hope into FE7's narrative, that even creations born from cruelty can deviate, surprise, or reach beyond what their maker intended. Legacies can be rewritten, and the beings who inherit them are never entirely trapped by the hands that shape them.